Hi guys, my name is Miss Cohen. Today I have a really awesome book for you all. It's a fiction book called A Frog Thing. It's by Eric Druckmann and illustrated by James Marcello. This is the cover of the book. Our main character, his name is Frank, and we're going to learn a lot about him. He has a really exciting adventure that I think you all will really like. So the reason I have this book for you all today, besides it being an awesome story with great pictures, is that it's really good for working on identifying the moral or the lesson of the story. So basically what a moral lesson is, something that you can learn from the author or main character and apply to your life. So you might have heard like folk tales and stuff often have a moral or theme of the story, but so do books like A Frog Thing. So we'll be reading this book today and be talking about the theme or moral at the end of the book. But what we're going to do before we even get started is we're going to do a story walk. So what I'm going to do is show you all a few pages that are in the book. I'm not going to show you all of them, but I'll show you enough so that you can start asking yourselves questions before we even start reading. Like, who's the book going to be about? Maybe what's going to happen? Anything. There might even be just little things you notice. So we'll start with the cover of the book. I'm just going to show you all a few pages. So just thinking of questions you might have, something that might help you know what the story is going to be about. So like I said, that's called a story walk. You might have heard a picture walk. We're just looking at pictures, thinking, getting our brains started, what the book's going to be about. So before we do start reading, I will let you know, as we're reading, I will be pausing and asking you all some questions. If you want, you can shout your answers out to the screen. You can pause the video, write your answers down, whatever you want. So to get started, I do want you to look at the cover of the book again. I'll zoom in so you all can see it, and I want you to think, just by looking, maybe what it's going to be about. You can also think about those images that I showed you in the book. Just getting an idea, looking at the title, and we'll go ahead and get started. So, A Frog Thing by Eric Druckmann and illustrated by James Marcello. Frank wanted to fly, but he was a frog, and frogs can't fly. Frank was different though, special, aerodynamic. I'm going to pause there on that word, aerodynamic. What aerodynamic means is having the shape which kind of reduces the drag when you're flying. So basically if you want to think of like a spaceship or a plane, those are all aerodynamic, meaning they're able to fly. So Frank thinks he's aerodynamic. You can do whatever you set your mind to, Frankie, his parents had promised. So Frank set his mind to flying, but it was more like falling than flying. And everyone laughed at him. Tired and discouraged, Frank buried his head in his big webbed feet, and that's how Frank's parents found him. Frank explained his problem, and there was a long silence as they thought about how to respond. Frankie, started Frank's dad, when we said you could do anything you set your mind to, we meant any frog thing. See, flying is a bird thing, just like staying underwater is a fish thing. Now I want you to think maybe why Frank's dad is saying that certain things are a frog thing or a bird thing or a fish thing. And then maybe think, do you agree with him? Your answer might change as we read, but go ahead and think, do you agree? Some of you all might think maybe yes, maybe no, maybe in between, but just go ahead and think about that. Yes, you should find a frog thing, said Mom, but I want to fly. I'm sorry, kiddo, but frogs can't fly, explained Dad. No, agreed Mom. We swim and we hop, but we don't fly. They don't understand, he thought. We understand, they said, and they patted Frank's shoulders. Frank sat in the dark, still sad, but growing more determined. I'll show them, he thought. I'll learn to fly, and I'll fly right over that pond. So I want you to think of a time that maybe you felt like Frank, something you're really determined to do, even if it might be hard. Somebody said you can't do it. Just go ahead and think of a time if that's happened to you. He jumped and ran and leapt and dove. He flapped and flapped and flapped. And finally, just flopped on top of a leaf to rest. He soaked his sore feet and hung his heavy head until... Splash! Something crashed in the water and started to sink. Frank leapt into action. It's a little baby bird, he thought. He swooped down, swept her up, and swam her back to shore. I'll zoom in on that bird for you all. His nervous mother bird hugged the baby tight. Her baby coughed and wheezed, then opened her eyes, safe and warm in her mother's wings. The mother bird turned to kiss Frank right on the cheek. He was very surprised and a little embarrassed. Thank you, she chirped. What a great swimmer you are. How can I ever repay you? Oh, it was nothing, ma'am, said Frank, for he was a very polite and modest frog. Please, I want to do something for you. Anything. Well, suggested Frank, I really, really want to fly. But frogs don't fly, said the mother bird. I know, admitted Frank. And you still want to fly? Frank shrugged. I've set my mind to it. She looked in his eyes, then flew off in a flutter. Wait here, she cried. I'll be right back. And she did come back with another bird and a twig between them. Grab on, she called. Before he knew it, they were high above the trees. The morning sun streamed through the sky, and the wind whistled over Frank's slick green skin. It was a little scary at first, but soon he relaxed as they glided and rose and swooped and dove. Everyone hurried to see Frank fly. They watched from the bank as he and the birds passed high overhead. This is no ordinary frog thing, observed Frank's mom. So I want you to look here and think, there's a lot kind of going on in this picture. And I like here when there's a lot going on in a picture to kind of ask some W questions. Like who, what, those type of questions. So I want you to think, who's flying in this picture? Maybe who's helping Frank? Maybe where are they going? What are these people thinking? Or people, frogs. Maybe what they're thinking. When their flight was finished, the mother bird pulled Frank close. You are a very special frog, she said with a wish of her wings and flew back to her nest. Breathless, Frank waved, thank you so much. Frank hopped home, somehow lighter than before. On his way, he met his folks. Frankie, we saw you up there, Mom beamed. Fantastic, croaked Dad. You can do anything you set your mind to. Anything, agreed Mom. Well, any frog thing, maybe, Frank explained. The birds were the ones flying. I was just holding on. But I do think I could be one of the great swimmers. His parents smiled proudly as Frank joined his friends in the pond. Frank had wanted to fly, but he was a frog, and frogs can't fly, but they sure can swim. So here at the end of the book, I think the last few pages are really important. So something I like to do is when I'm looking for the moral or lesson of the story, is I like to look at the last page or maybe 2 pages of the story. And then if you're using a chapter book, sometimes at the last few paragraphs, usually the author will kind of wrap everything up for you. So before I reread those last 2 pages, I want you to think back to the beginning, what Frank wanted to do, how he felt, maybe his emotions, and then maybe how that changes at the end. So let's think back to the beginning. I want you to remember how Frank felt, maybe the emotions, what he wanted to do. And now I'm going to read the last 2 pages for you all. So the parents are saying that Frank did an awesome job flying. And the dad said, you can do anything you set your mind to. And Frank said, well, any frog thing maybe, he explained. The birds were the ones flying. I was just holding on. But I do think I could be one of the great swimmers. His parents smiled proudly as Frank joined his friends in the pond. Frank had wanted to fly, but he was a frog, and frogs can't fly, but they sure can swim. So, thinking back, remember how we thought he felt and the goals he had, and then comparing that to the end. Maybe what changed, and then maybe what the lesson, the moral of the story is. So this book, I think, honestly, has a lot that you could pick from. They all kind of tie together. But I want you to think what the moral of the story is. If you were to learn something from Frank, maybe what would that be? It could be anything. I have a few ideas, but I want to see you all go ahead and write your answers down. Maybe make it a sentence like I've learned from the story or I've learned from Frank, and what the lesson of the story is. But before we end, there are a few extra questions that I kind of want you to think about. You can always write these down if you want. There's just kind of some questions to still get you thinking about the book we read. So the first one is, what words, kind of using adjectives, would you use to describe Frank? So I think Frank's a pretty awesome character. You might agree or disagree, and I want to know why. If you were to tell a friend about Frank, who he is, what adjectives would you use? How would you describe him? You can always think back to the book, and if you need to rewind the video to find events that can help you, go ahead and do that right now. The second question is there something in the story that happened that reminded you of your own life? This could be anything. There are a lot of events in the story that might have reminded you of something, or maybe even somebody you know. So those are just a few questions that you can answer using this book. I hope you all really like this book. Once again, it's a frog thing by Eric Drachman and illustrated by James Marcello. Thank you all for joining me today.